Hello and welcome to this tutorial of FHIR-out-of-the-box. First off, let's take a quick look at FUME, Outburn's FHIR Converter, just to get a taste of what's going on in the background. We are now looking at the FUME designer. On the left, we have the source data, which arrives from the source system through the production workflow of Iris or HealthShare Connect. The supported source data can be JSON, CSV, or HL7 v2 format. On the top right, we see the map written in FUME's transformation language, Flash. The map, which has its own name, can be saved as a conformance resource in the FHIR repository. On the bottom, we see the resulting FHIR resource. FUME can create any FHIR resource or bundle. The FUME API can accept the source as part of the body of the message, as well as the name of the saved map in the URL itself. The response will include the resource or any error. Now we move to FHIR-out-of-the-box. First off, you should know that there is a ZPM package which contains a wizard that can configure the entire workspace. The only prerequisites are that you have Iris installed and have created a namespace. The package creates, if needed, a FHIR repository and creates a full production with correlated classes about which we will soon talk, as well as providing an initial configuration. If the ZPM is not yet installed, open the studio, enter the credentials if needed, choose the namespace, as we have done here already, and drag the ZPM file into the parent folder on the right, as shown here. Once the installation is done, you'll receive a compilation finished successfully. Next, open the terminal and log in. Then run command ZN and the name of your namespace to change the namespace. Then run command ZPM, which will run the installer. Next, we will switch the ZPM to use the package repository where the package resides. Note that we are using Outburn's repository for demonstration purposes. Next, we will run the installer. Once it starts, you will be asked several questions. First off, is the namespace correct? Next, do we want to create the FHIR server? The decision depends on the entire solution and target workflow. If you choose yes, you will be asked for the endpoint. You may choose the default one. Once the repository is created, you will enter the URL of the FUME REST call. If you don't know the URL during the installation process, it may be updated later. Finally, you may enter the URL of the FUME designer and the TCP port for the business service component. All right, the installation is done. Moving on to the next part. After the deployment of the package, we get this production screen. First off, let's take a look at the production settings. As you can see, the installer has already entered values for the FUME endpoint and FUME designer URL. These may be updated manually if needed. Now, let's understand each component. We have a component of FUME Business Service, which communicates with the outside world and receives data. We built a class that is good for many use cases and projects, but here also in certain cases, some configuration is required. For example, if there will need to be direct access to the database for data retrieval, the business service is not exactly the right fit, as it is constantly listening for data on a specific port. So it is not initiating the request for data. So there are a couple of settings here. We can choose the business process, as there can be situations where we will require several business services, each one taking in different types of data, JSON, CSV, or v2, and will transfer it to different processes, which will process the data in different ways and transfer the data to the correct transform operation. We can also set correct content type either here or in the transform operation, wherever is more comfortable. Leave this empty unless you wish to enforce a specific content type. Let's move on to the business operation. We have two classes of business operation. The first is the FUME transform operation, which handles the communication with FUME, i.e. calling FUME via REST services. It takes the source message, sends it to FUME, and receives the resultant FHIR resource. Under the FUME settings, there are two settings. FUME map allows us to choose the FUME transformation map. It should be mentioned that the list of maps is populated according to the FUME configuration at setup. The second setting is the content type, which allows you to specify one of three types: CSV, JSON, or HL7v2. This content type must correspond to the map you have chosen. So what do we do if we have more than one source of data and we need to use multiple maps? In that case, we have two options. The first option is to duplicate the class, which is very easy to do. That way, we can configure different instances of FUME transform operation for every transformation. The second option is to leave these two fields, FUME map and content type, empty, and to create the whole business logic within the business process module. We will now demonstrate a simple workflow using a single message. This can all be scaled up. We have an operation that can get a message, send it to FUME. After the source was transformed according to the FUME map we chose, it receives the response and stores the resulting resource in the FHIR server. This is achieved with the FUME store operation, which has a single drop-down menu with the registered endpoint of the local or remote FHIR server. So let's go to the business process and see how we can use it. We should mention that the business process is not an integral component of our solution, but it was added for this demonstration because in some cases, integrators would prefer using our model, and in other cases, they might want to create other components and business logic. Let's look at the flowchart in the business process. As you can see, it's very simple. We have one FUME transform operation, which is called by the business process, with the source message that arrives from the business service, which we will address in a moment. After receiving the FHIR resource response from FUME, the FUME store operation is called, which stores the result. It's important to mention that we have a business logic that checks to see if the result has its own logical ID or not. If it does, the REST operation will be put. Otherwise, it will be a post operation. Keep in mind that this is just a demonstration, and changes will probably have to be made for each use case. So as a reminder, we said that it's possible to call many maps not with many instances of the FUME store operation, but instead with the business process. How do we achieve this? We can click on the request builder. Then we will click on the FUME map, add action, and set. Then, at the property value, we can choose the map we want to call or any other business process component defining the logic for choosing the map. For example, we can enter the static value Lariado patient. This way, the business process will send along with the source data a parameter of a map. Thus, the whole logic of sending the map along with the data to a single transformation operation is done by the business process and is configured case by case in each project. So to summarize, we have two options. Option one is building the logic on the basis of a single FUME transform operation without choosing a map, through logic building in the FUME business process. The second option is duplicating the FUME transform operation, configuring the map inside, and then the FUME business process sends the source data to the correct FUME transform operation according to the business requirements. Now, let's see a live demonstration in Postman. So here we have the message we want to send. We have the endpoint, which in our case is localhost 9980. We have the message body, which has the source we want to transform, and we'll send it. And we get an OK message and the location of our FHIR resource. Let's get that FHIR resource. And we can see that the source information has indeed been transformed to a patient resource. Success. Finally, we can show you a process using Intersystems Visual Trace. Go to Messages, Message Viewer. The top one is the last, and we'll go to View Full Trace. So when we look at the visual trace, we can see the service, process, and operation. The business service received the JSON. It was transferred to the business process, which calls the transform operation, transferring the data to it. We can see the request contains source JSON, a FUME map, in this case, Laniado patient. As you can see, it says FUME map Laniado patient passed in the body of the request. This means the map was defined in advance in the business process. So the business process is responsible to transfer only the correct type of data to the transform operation, or we will get an error. Next, we see that FUME was called and subsequently performed the transformation and returned the patient type resource to the operation. The business operation, which got the response from FUME, returns it back to the business process, which in turn calls the FUME store operation, which stores it on the server. You can see here that the resource has been saved. We will always get back the resource location on the server. We can also see that the patient got an auto-generated ID, meaning that the operation was a post operation, which tells us that the message was sent without an ID. Once the process is finished, the business operation sends the standard FHIR response back to the business service, and from there to the client. The solution also includes a web interface that allows the user to perform the following actions. First, we can access the FUME designer we showed at the beginning of this video. The second tab is for the HL7v2 routing rules editor. We have tutorials for this feature if you wish to learn more about it. Note that if you do use this, you must remove the map from both the FUME business service and the FUME business process. The final tab allows you to test the HL7v2 process according to the routing rules set up in the routing rules builder. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.